Ubisoft tries to attack Call of Duty. Or do they? XDefiant is a game replicating the feeling of old arcade shooters a la Modern Warfare, but it stumbles a little bit too much for my taste to achieve this goal. I will tell you why that is in this first impression, based on the closed beta of the game. Lend me your ear and leave your own opinions about the game in the comments. So let's start with the story. Well, the game doesn't have any story, and seeing several Ubisoft brands mixed into the game's identity, it feels more like a bland attempt of an in-company multiverse than a game that has a clear narrative. It's a little bit sad in my opinion, because games like Overwatch already showed that a little lore and characterization can indeed have a positive effect on the game's feeling, and even something simple like real-life baddies versus real-life goodies in Counter-Strike gives a game some personality. But that sadly is not the case here, and it feels a lot like a corporate attempt of a multiverse IP, but without any clear vision of it. Why are we fighting against each other? What are the goals of the factions? We don't know. It just feels arbitrary, but I also think that, let's be honest, most people don't give a wet fart about stuff like this, so it probably doesn't matter that much in the end for the game's potential success. But hey, the game looks and sounds pretty nice. Ubisoft's Snowdrop engine shows muscles and lays the foundation of a really nice looking game with many different environments and, typical for Ubisoft, with plenty of graphic options to adjust the visual quality to your own likings and hardware. Very solid, as always. Besides that, the sounds are good too. Having known weapons of Modern Warfare, you won't hear anything that will be completely new, but no weapon I used sounded bad. Though some of them sounded like there were rockets exploding in the barrel, but well, maybe that's the case in real life too, I don't know. And being a game that doesn't try to be hyper-realistic, that will have a positive effect on this game's longevity. So that is also good for anything that wants to be a game as a service. And another important thing to mention in times of modern UI design, the menus look good and work fine. No monstrosities like someone smashed the Netflix menus into the game and called it a day. Everything is easy to use and intuitive, no matter if you want to change your loadout or weapon configuration or apply a new skin to one of the characters. It just works and there's nothing to complain here. Who knows, the old Call of Duty menus will get used to it very fast. Now let's move to the core of this game. XDefiant, and I will call the game from now on just Defiant, because saying that stupid X all the time is like reading the username of a 10-year-old, so Defiant's gameplay can be summarized as old school Call of Duty, where the design lead stood up and said, "Yeah, but let's add some hero shooter stuff." And this is something that makes the game worse than it has to be. But step by step. Let's start with the progress. Unlocking new attachment feels rewarding, and if you go for the max level of a weapon, you even unlock prestige skins in bronze, silver and gold. Just like in the old days. The different attachments bring solid customizability options to the table, even when the stats barely tell you what is actually changing and by how much. I mean, just show me some specific numbers, man. There is indeed an extra detailed site that shows you a lot, but also isn't explaining much and can't be opened while you're changing things, so that doesn't really help, especially when you're still confused if a green plus 5% recoil means that there is more recoil or if there is less. It's, by the way, the same with the bars on the side. When values go up, the bars are red, and if they go down, the bars are green. Why? That's not how that usually works. They absolutely have to make things clearer in that regards. What brings us to the most important part of the game? The play. The gameplay. Got it? No? Okay, the general moment-to-moment gameplay is pretty solid. Everyone that asked for a new, old Modern Warfare, this is it. Despite having a lot of server problems in this beta, the gameplay still felt snappy and direct, except maybe when you're climbing on things. And that is the biggest compliment I can give to a game like this. The general shooter gameplay feels good, the weapons feel good, the feeling of your own movement is a little too fast in my opinion, and the weapon balancing might need some tweaks too. But besides that, it felt mostly fair when fighting an enemy one-on-one. And this is a great base. But that kind of situation barely exists in this game, and that's where my negative points begin. First of all, the game feels like a designed hero shooter, but with Call of Duty gameplay. And those two elements really don't like each other, and the same seems to be true for the players. Because I barely had one game where all players in both teams actually played around the objectives. 80% play every mode like it was a team deathmatch, and it's a shame that exactly this standard mode for this kind of shooter was missing. Every available mode was about objectives, mostly forcing players to stand in a specific area for a while to move a payload forward or capture a location to get points. Besides the very short period of having the hotshot mode, that seemed to be in an experimental state and had, from my perspective, heavy problems with the very random spawn system, especially on small maps. Besides that, there was no TDM, no gun game, no bomb diffusion or anything like this. What we got were mostly these typical hero shooter or battlefield modes. And the map design made me feel like they originally wanted to make exactly this. Every mode is a 6 vs 6 match, but the most objectives have about 3 to 5 angles people can approach from and shoot at you. That leads, together with the very jumpy spawn system in modes like Occupy, to a gameplay where you're rarely killed by enemies that you see, but much more from someone spawning in your back or that is flanking you. It always felt to me that that's why there are characters that can set up barriers, but even those barriers barely help. They don't cover that much, don't last very long, and can be destroyed even faster, and then they have a 30 seconds cooldown. Within that context, they barely felt useful, but much more like an unneeded addition if the maps would have been designed a little different. And the same goes for most other skills. Use them every 30 seconds to be actually useful for the game mode, and then play Call of Duty for the time in between. I really think that none of these abilities should exist as abilities, but could be easily included into the weapon arsenal, be deleted entirely for the sake of a better general balancing, or live on as kill or point streaks that incentivize to play around objectives. What is also something the game is heavily missing, by the way, because playing the actual game mode gets basically not rewarded in any way, except with getting shot more often into your butt. And a few examples for what I mean with changing the abilities into, for example, the arsenal. Like the smaller shield could be a primary weapon, only used with your pistols. It's already not strong, but would have a general defensive use that way. Then they could lower the healing time in general, so you don't have games where 8 out of 12 players use the Libertar characters just to heal themselves. That's another point where it felt to me like they made a core game element, worse, healing, just to have a reason for those abilities to exist. And something like the Pyro and Splinter Cell skills could be just streaks. Also, without having the models attached to their abilities, you would also be more free to use the character that you want, and no, that does not create more confusion. You can already not distinguish between some characters of different factions, and if you can, it doesn't matter because you can't adapt to it in the small time frames the game is giving you. Because the good Call of Duty-ish core gameplay simply does not really support any tactical hero systems. It's not like Overwatch. Period. But changes like this would mean that the maps have to be redesigned, because without skills at all, some of the game modes wouldn't work at all, at the moment at least. I mean, it's already not fun getting killed like a sitting duck 80% of the time whenever your skills are not available, You have to wait several seconds for the heal to start or being shot when changing your magazines, because the time to kill in combination with a fast movement is still high enough to make you pump 2/3 of a magazine into enemies. So that it wouldn't be enough to kill a second one, usually. So that all is something that felt incredibly off to me, and my point stands to completely trash the hero aspects and make the game into a Ubisoft version of Call of Duty. Use the characters solely as cosmetics, adjust the maps for the more direct style of gameplay, and make things less random, like for example the spawns. And that's my biggest takeaway from this beta, that they have to decide what this game is supposed to be. A Call of Duty within the Ubiverse, or a hero shooter, but then they would have to rebuild the whole skill system and lower the cooldown significantly, so I would personally just go with the first option. Besides that, there are also a few minor things that I need to mention. There is no body block with enemies, for example, so people can literally just run through you. Then I think that melee attacks should be one-hits in most circumstances at least, what isn't the case at the moment, what makes them basically not viable to use. And I noticed that some map elements are non-interactable, like you can't get onto some tables, for example, and they behave like invisible walls, what is irritating, especially when you can interact with a chair next to it. Then this game would benefit from a ping system, and the idea of making ranked games into 4 versus 4 is absolutely ridiculous, especially with those non-existing respawn times. There is no tactics, it's just a big slaughter fest about which team flanks better, and having just one person quit the game resulted almost always in a match that ended 1 versus 4. This is not a beta state, this has to be taken back into conception state, like some of the other things too, in my opinion. And I know that was a lot of negative critique, so I want to make one thing clear again. This game has absolutely the potential to be a very successful Call of Duty alternative, made by a AAA developer. It's a nice and shiny raw diamond, they just have to grind the rough edges off. And no matter what, I am looking forward to the open beta and the release. But I just fear that the current problems might be something that could kill the game very fast after release, and I really don't want another Hyperscape scenario. Coming now to the straight up bads, and besides some needed polishing, there actually weren't any clear bugs in the game except that my username didn't show since day 2 of the beta. The much bigger problem were server and netcode issues, but to test those is often the reason betas exist, so I won't go too hard on those or the big issues that we had, like people that were not able to get any progress for their account and loadouts, or the many connection errors in the first days of the beta. Like, it's a beta, right? But that said, there's one big issue. It felt to me that the servers had an incredibly low tick rate sometimes. That might be caused by the general server problems that we had, but the movements and hitboxes of character models felt incredibly jumpy sometimes. I had people glitching through walls, the enemy's models rarely look into your direction when they shoot at you, it is very common to get shot while being behind obstacles, and the models adjust the movement direction while being mid-air, when they jump, for example. That also made it a pain in the ass to get a feeling for the time to kill, what is already hard when half of the teams have healing abilities or passively increased health bars. I want to give them here the benefit of the doubt, but that absolutely needs to be better the next time we can play the game, or I see the devs will get their ass handed to them. Well, I already saw some people mention that they remade the netcode internally, so let's stay carefully optimistic here, I would say. And that leaves us with the conclusion. Well, it was a closed beta and we had problems. Problems are there to be solved, and maybe someone from Ubisoft sees this video and thinks about my points. Besides that, I looked forward to this game since it got announced because I saw the potential, and that feeling didn't change for good and for not so good reasons. It still has a lot of potential. but it still feels like an experiment to me that needs a bunch of polish and adjustments around the edges. Also, we have to see how the monetization will look like at release, and I hate battle passes at this point, but I want Defiant to succeed and be a solid alternative for everyone that seeks for a good old Call of Duty experience. Well, that was my first impression of Defiant. Tell me what you think of it in the comments. My name is TechTrack, but just call me Techie. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, and maybe pay me a visit over at my streaming channels, Techie7. See ya.